When my wife emptied our account, sold the truck I rebuilt, and told me I'd die alone, I believed her. I had $14, a plastic bag of clothes, and a slip that bought me $40 for my plasma. I walked into a strip mall clinic to sell blood and buy time, but the nurse's eyes flicked from my arm to the monitor, and the room changed temperature. Destiny doesn't knock. It pages security and calls a private bank. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. I live in Dayton, Ohio. Lived, I should say, because the version of me who walked into the plasma center on North Main that morning was more bruised than man. The divorce decree had my name stamped on every loss a person could carry. Marissa took the house, the couch, the Labrador, and the last of my pride, chiseled into a line she delivered as if reading a weather report. "You'll die alone and broke." She left the key on the counter like a period. I had put gas in a borrowed Corolla with the last 10. I had skipped dinner. I had a job interview at 2. You can't show up to a warehouse shift with your stomach throwing empty punches. They scanned my ID at the front desk. The nurse swabbed my arm. She smiled the autopilot smile of long shifts and beeping machines. The needle went in clean. The centrifuge hummed. Then something in her expression flinched. She glanced at the monitor, then at my chart, then at me. "Sir, don't move. I need to call someone." I thought I was about to be told I had a disease, or that my iron was low, or that my blood pressure meant I should sit and breathe. Instead, 20 minutes later, 3 men in suits walked through the automatic doors like they were stepping into a boardroom. The lead one had silver hair and the tired, careful voice of someone who does not make mistakes. "Jacob Hale?" he asked. I nodded because the tape on my arm had me anchored to the chair, because my mouth suddenly felt like wool. "After 32 years, he whispered, leaning close enough that only I could hear it. "We finally found you." Until that moment, my life had been a string of cheap receipts and repair estimates. What he said next changed the ledger. "My name is Daniel Crane. I'm a trust officer with Blackstone & Crane Private Bank. I think you may be the biological heir of Dr. Lionel Ward, founder of Ward Biologics, who died in 1993. His will established a contingent trust for a child he never met. The criteria to identify that child were unusual, Bombay blood phenotype, 2 specific HLA markers, a locket with initials LW on the clasp if available, but the blood was the key. We partnered with blood centers to flag a match if one ever appeared. Your sample triggered every alarm." I stared at the machine pulling my blood in lazy loops. "I was adopted," I said, because the words had been a knot in my throat since I was old enough to read my own file. "Closed adoption, never opened. My mom, Susan, the only mom I ever knew, died when I was 28. "Then you know why this took 32 years, he said. "We'd like to swab your cheek for a preliminary. If that supports this, we'll pay for a full panel. If that confirms it, the trust requires us to petition the Montgomery County Probate Court to unseal your adoption record for a final determination. There's also a deadline clause we need to discuss." Except nothing in my life had come without a catch. "What deadline?" I asked. He slid a thin envelope from his briefcase and tapped a paragraph with a careful finger. "If the heir is not located by June 30th, 2023, the corpus reverts to the Ward Foundation for research grants. We filed for extensions every 5 years, but the court set a hard stop, December 31st, 2024, with a condition. If credible evidence of the heir surfaced before that date, the court would allow 90 more days to adjudicate. Your match is credible. Today is January 18th, 2025. We are inside the 90 days the court granted us after an emergency motion we filed on December 29th, when an out-of-state donor pinged one marker. That donor turned out not to be you. Then your sample hit. A clock started ticking in my head, loud as a timer bomb. They swabbed my cheek. The nurse hovered like something holy might drop from the ceiling. Mr. Crane handed me his card and a second envelope. "There's also a modest advance the trust authorizes, contingent on cooperation," he said. "It's $5,000. We'll wire it today if you sign the receipt." I signed. My hands shook. It felt like bricks being lifted one by one from my chest. But then I pictured Marissa's grin when the judge said equitable distribution, and somehow it all landed nearly entirely on me because she had the better lawyer, and I had a stack of receipts that looked like poor choices more than proof. She had moved in with her boss the week after. She had texted me a photo of their wine glasses on my old coffee table. "You're not coming back." I did not know what a trust could fix. I did know what proof looked like. Proof was numbers and dates and signatures. Proof was a nurse's affidavit and a lab chain of custody. Proof was stronger than a sneer. They let me finish the drawer because they said it would do good for someone else. I pocketed the snack voucher. I walked into the January air, the wind scraping my cheeks like new paper. My phone lit with a wire confirmation, $5,000 received. For the first time in months, my balance had more than one comma. I didn't buy a steak or a new jacket. I walked to a coffee shop on 3rd and ordered the cheapest drip. I opened a new spreadsheet. I started a list. Step 1. Call the number Mr. Crane had circled. The lab. Step 2. Call a lawyer. Not a billboard lawyer. Someone who read footnotes. Step 3. Move out of the weekly motel before they sold my duffel while I slept. Step 4. Pull every record of the divorce. Pull my emails. Pull the termination notice my warehouse manager had pushed across a desk like it was a volunteer thing. Pull the marketing campaign invoices from the side hustle Marissa had borrowed my identity to start so she could build credit for us. I used 200 of the advance on an initial consult with an attorney named Kerry Holden. Her office was above a pawn shop, which turned me off until she asked the questions nobody else had asked. She set a flat retainer, $8,200. I swallowed. I signed. 3 parallel tracks, she said, tapping her legal pad with a pen. Probate to unseal and verify the trust. Employment to address your termination if there's a whiff of retaliation or interference. Post-decree relief in domestic relations court if your ex failed to disclose assets or committed conversion. Selling tools that were your separate property, for example. She sold my father's snap-on chest, I said. It had his initials sun-faded in the paint. Receipts? I pulled a photo from my phone. I had taken it the day before the movers she hired emptied the garage. The chest sat by the door like a faithful dog waiting. The date stamp was clear. In the next image, the chest was gone and a Facebook Marketplace listing, a screenshot sent by a neighbor, showed it for $1,200, posted 10 hours later. Good, she said. We'll send a 10-day demand. If she doesn't pay or return, we file for contempt and a writ of replevin. Judges don't like people disposing of others' separate property. And the job? Why were you fired? I took 2 unpaid days to move because the decree said I had to be out by Friday. I told my supervisor 2 weeks ahead. He said fine, then the day after, HR called it job abandonment. Marissa's new boyfriend is the regional account lead for the company. He and my supervisor are golf buddies. I have texts. Forward everything, she said. We'll send a litigation hold letter today. If they so much as delete an email after receipt, a court can impose sanctions. We'll demand mediation before suit. Companies do math. If it looks like retaliation or interference, they settle. I forwarded the texts. The one that tasted like copper in my mouth read, "Make sure he's not on the schedule next month. We're done with him." It came from a number tied to a contact named M. Keller. Marissa's boyfriend, Matthew Keller, sent to my supervisor the week my schedule dried up. But then another shoe fell. It always does. 2 days later, Mr. Crane called with a tone that tightened my chest. "Jacob, we have a problem," he said. "A woman reached out to the Ward Foundation claiming you're attempting to defraud the trust. She attached photos from your divorce and accused you of shopping for DNA. The Foundation's counsel froze our internal process pending court direction." "Let me guess," I said. "Is her first name Marissa?" "It is," he said after a pause. Marissa had always been faster at pettiness than I was at breath. It was a race I had no interest in winning. But this wasn't petty. This was money, and a name attached to a company that still made treatments used in hospitals my mother had worked in for 25 years. I drove to Kerry's office with a folder of everything I had. She read the Foundation's letter. She typed for 20 minutes without looking up. "We're filing an emergency motion in probate to maintain the status quo and enjoin the Foundation from communicating with third parties outside counsel on the question of your identity until the court hears from us," she said. "We'll attach the lab's preliminary results and a sworn statement from the plasma center nurse. We'll also ask for a protective order on your adoption record so the internet doesn't climb into your crib. How long? Judge Hayward moves quick on these, she said. If we get on the docket next week, we can have a decision in 10 days. 10 days. Another clock. The day of the hearing, I wore the one tie I kept, even when I sold the watch it matched. The courtroom smelled like old varnish and winter coats. Mr. Crane sat behind us. The Foundation's counsel sat 3 rows back with a stack of binders and a haircut that cost more than my retainer. Judge Hayward looked over her reading glasses like a teacher who didn't have time for the class clown. I have an emergency motion to preserve the status quo and set a process for verification, she said, and an email from the Foundation suggesting fraud without evidence. Counsel? Kerry stood. Her voice stayed calm. Your Honor, we have preliminary lab results showing Mr. Hale carries the Bombay phenotype, rarer than 1 in 10,000, and HLA markers that match the Ward family record. We have an affidavit from a nurse who flagged his test. We have a chain of custody for the cheek swab. We propose a court-ordered, court-supervised comparative test at an AABB-accredited lab within 7 days. We are not asking the court to declare Mr. Hale the heir today. We are asking the court to stop the Foundation from poisoning the well while we follow the exact process Dr. Ward anticipated, verify, then determine. The judge turned to the Foundation's counsel. Do you have any evidence he is not the heir? We have concerns, the counsel said, which is how people say nothing with a diploma. Concerns are not evidence, the judge said. Motion granted. Lab test within 7 days. Results to the court under seal. The Foundation will not communicate statements about fraud to any third party pending this court's order. Violations will result in sanctions of $500 per day from the date of violation until retraction. The clerk stamped orders. Papers moved like birds. I exhaled. But then I realized the hearing had shaken a different tree. Marissa had filed a motion in domestic relations to modify spousal support upward, citing my sudden increase in income. She attached the wire confirmation for the $5,000 advance as Exhibit A. She did not mention that she had signed away any future claims when she took my father's tools. Kerry smiled without humor. She's trying to use the rope we handed you to hang you with, she said. We'll file a response tomorrow and tack on our contempt motion for conversion. Judges love symmetry. The lab scheduled the comparative test for Monday. They pricked my finger, drew blood, took photos of my ID, logged everything twice. Mr. Crane provided the Ward family marker profile. The tech sealed the envelopes like a ceremony. Wednesday afternoon, Kerry called. I pulled the car into a lot by the river because I didn't trust my legs. It's a match, Jacob, she said, and then let the silence do what words could not. The probability that you are not Dr. Ward's biological grandson is less than 1 in a billion. The court's order came the next day. It read like a bridge lowered over a chasm I had stared at my whole life. The judge declared me the heir under the terms of the trust. She unsealed my adoption record for the limited purpose of confirming the maternal name on the birth certificate. Lisa Ward, age 19, who had consented to adoption and left a note with a social worker. I named him Jacob because it means held. Please tell him he was. I cried in a parking lot, like I had been holding my breath since 1993. The trust distribution hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The bank presented the numbers. The corpus had grown. Dr. Ward had left a portfolio of Ward Biologics common stock and municipal bonds. After taxes and fees, the distribution came to $2,750,000, with an additional 12% of voting shares held in a family trust with restrictions on sale for 5 years. The judge asked if I had questions. I had 1,000, none of which she could answer. I nodded. I signed. Congratulations, Mr. Hale, she said, and banged a gavel that sounded like a door opening. The settlement wire hit on Friday at 10:02 a.m. I sat on a bench with my phone and watched numbers that had once only mocked me align into an arrangement that looked like air. Then I walked into my bank and opened 3 accounts, one for taxes, one for living, one I named for the mother who signed a line so I could have mine. Then I turned back to the wreckage. Kerry's 10-day demand to Marissa ticked down without a response. On day 11 we filed for contempt and a writ to recover the snap-on chest or its value, plus attorney fees. The judge set a hearing. Marissa arrived in a white coat she thought made her look like a professional and a tan I knew she couldn't afford without someone else's card. Kerry called me to the stand. I told the judge about my father's chest. I laid the photo down. The judge barely glanced at Marissa before speaking. "Return the chest within 5 days," she said, "or pay $1,200 plus $1,500 in attorney fees and $100 per day until compliance." Marissa's lawyer asked for mercy. The judge's face didn't move. "Motion to modify spousal support?" the judge added, flipping to the next page. "Denied. The $5,000 advance was for legal process to determine identity. It is not income for the purposes of your order. Further attempts to misrepresent may be sanctionable." Afterward, in the hallway, Marissa stepped close enough that I could smell the cloying sweetness of the perfume she wore when she wanted something. "You think you're someone now?" she said. "I think I kept every receipt," I said. "Do you want to see the next one?" She looked past me, to where Kerry stood with a stack of motions like a promise. The employment case moved faster than I expected. Our litigation hold letter worked like a trap. Within a week, my former supervisor forwarded a "whoops, delete that message" that had hit his inbox from Matthew Keller. Kerry printed it, highlighted the line where he wrote, "Let's make it look like attendance," and slid it across a mediator's table in a conference room with bad art. The company's counsel did math in real time. I watched him understand the cost of depositions, the cost of a jury hearing that a boyfriend had orchestrated my firing after a divorce, the cost of an email that said the quiet part loud. We left with a signed settlement, $186,400 for lost wages and damages, a neutral reference letter, and a non-disparagement clause that only bound them, not me. If they failed to pay within 30 days, interest would run at 6% and a stipulated judgment would enter without further hearing. One problem, Matthew couldn't help himself. He texted me 2 days after the mediation, "Enjoy your pity check." He added a screenshot, as if proof of contempt tasted better. Kerry filed it as Exhibit B to a motion to enter judgment. The company's lawyer called within the hour. The wire cleared that afternoon. With the trust and the settlement, I did not buy a yacht. I paid the motel bill and left a tip on the counter for the clerk who had told me which nights were quietest. I rented a 1-bedroom on East 5th with a window that looked at a maple tree stout enough to handle storms. I put first and last month down without swallowing glass. I went to a shelter and adopted a mutt with a crooked ear who decided immediately that I was his job. I bought back my father's chest from a mechanic who had purchased it fair from Marissa and returned it for what he paid once he heard the story. I put the chest in my bedroom like an altar. I ran my fingers over the sun-faded initials, JH. Then I did something small and surgical. I bought a 10% interest in the LLC that owned the salon where Marissa rented a chair. Not to raise her rent, not to evict her, to enforce the lease she had ignored for months. The lease required proof of liability insurance and a sanitation course certificate. She had neither. I sent a letter as a member reminding management to apply the rules to all tenants. Fair is a cold thing when you've never met it. She obtained the certificate in a hurry. She purchased the insurance. She posted a story about leveling up. I did not like it or share it or gloat. I went for a walk with the dog and bought a coffee and stood by the river until my breath matched the water. The Ward Foundation invited me to a meeting. They wanted to see the face of the heir who had been a file for 3 decades. The director asked if I would serve on a community advisory board. I said yes, because my mother had worked nights so new parents could sleep. Because the first thing that found me was a nurse who did her job. I read the note in my adoption file again. I named him Jacob because it means held. I had never understood how someone could let go and hold at the same time. I understood now. Holding is not always with hands. On March 12, 2025, the probate court entered its final written findings. It spelled my name correctly. It ordered the trust distributions as articulated from the bench. It included a paragraph that I printed and kept in my wallet. The court finds by clear and convincing evidence that Jacob Hale is the biological grandson of Dr. Lionel Ward and the sole heir under the Ward Contingent Trust dated May 3, 1993. The court directs Blackstone and Crane Private Bank to distribute the corpus and administer the voting shares in accordance with the trust's express terms. On April 1st, the Domestic Relations Court entered judgment on the conversion claim, $1,200 for the chest, $1,500 in fees, and $900 in per diem sanctions for 9 days of delay. The order included an admonition: future bad faith filings will result in additional sanctions. Marissa's lawyer stared at the floor. By May, my life had edges again. I woke to a dog staring at me with the entire question of the day in his eye. I went to the gym because my body finally felt like something I could inhabit, not just drag. I met with Kerry to close out files and thanked her with a sincerity that made her wave me out of her office before she had to pretend she was fine. I drove past the plasma center. The automatic doors opened for other men with plastic bags and tight jaws. I parked and went in and handed the nurse a card that made her blink. "For the break room," I said, and bought coffee for a month and a maintenance service contract for their centrifuge because the hum had sounded tired. She hugged me in the way nurses do, quick and professional and full of truth. There were moments when anger still flared like a match, when I saw a white coat in a window and thought of lines delivered like verdicts. When a text from an old supervisor reminded me how small people could make a person when they felt big for a minute. But then I would open the chest and run my fingers along the tools my father had gripped with hands like mine. I would remember the judge's voice reading my name into a record that will outlast the both of us. I would take the dog to the river and watch the current carry cold water past stones that had seen worse winters than me. If you're waiting for the part where I bought revenge like a new suit and wore it to her salon, it never came. The best revenge is written in orders and balances and the quiet way your key turns in a door that is yours. The best revenge is receiving a letter that reads, "paid in full," while the person who bet against you checks the mail and finds only coupons. On the anniversary of the draw that started this, I drove to a cemetery on the east side where the Ward family plot sits under a line of oaks. I placed my palm on the stone with Lionel's name and said, "I think we're good now." The wind moved like a yes. I still keep the first slip they gave me at the plasma center. It's folded into quarters and tucked behind the adoption note in my wallet. $40 circled in blue pen. Proof that on the day I sold part of myself for a few bills, I bought back my whole life. And when the next storm comes, and it will, I'll remember that moment the nurse went pale and the room changed temperature and 3 suits came through a sliding door to say a sentence that pinned me to the earth. After 32 years, they finally found me.